I am Scott Steen, the Executive Director of the American Physiological Society, and I'm here today with Dr. Sue Bodine, Professor of Internal Medicine at the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. And our conversation today will be excerpted in a new column in the Physiologist magazine called Evolution, which will focus on significant issues affecting our community and the people who we believe are really making a difference on those issues. Today, we'll be talking about gender discrimination, sexual harassment, and other issues affecting women in science and physiology in particular. And we'll also be talking about how we can make a greater progress for gender equity, both at APS and beyond. So, Sue, I am wondering if you would start us off by just talking through your career, giving us some of the highlights of how you got to where you are.
So, I graduated, I got my PhD at UCLA in the Department of Kinesiology, and I took my first academic position at as an assistant professor in the Department of Orthopedics at UC San Diego. So I started there and went up the ranks to associate professor, and then left academia actually in 1996 and went to biotech, to Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. They were looking for a muscle physiologist. And I took the plunge and went to Regeneron and was there for 6 years, and then moved to another biotech company for a year, and then came back to academia at the University of California at Davis in 2003 as a full professor, and was at Davis for 14 years. And then recently in the last 5 years moved to the University of Iowa. So, you know, I've experienced both academic and biotech research, and then have had in the last, I guess, 10 years, the opportunity to get more involved in the APS, first as an associate editor, and then at the section level as a counselor, and then at the whole APS level as an elected counselor, and now and also as editor-in-chief. So I've found, you know, my experiences in getting involved in APS very rewarding, and an opportunity in some cases to get involved in leadership where they weren't available to me at the university level.
So what made you decide to go to industry, and what made you decide to come back to academia?
As people say, there's always a push and a pull. I was not happy in the environment I was at, you know, in academia, where I was at UC San Diego. And I happened to get a phone call from a recruiter saying this company was looking for a muscle physiologist, and would I be interested in applying for the job. And my first reaction was, no, I don't want to leave academia. But I sent my CV to him, and he sent it off to the company, and they contacted me, and that started a dialogue, and I ended up going out for an interview, and ended up deciding to go, because it was still a very strong research environment. I could stay connected to the research community. It was still, the company was publishing significantly. And so there was always the option if I wanted to come back. And so, it was a very, I think it was exciting time, especially in biotech. And I learned a lot, and I had a great experience, and published, some very strong papers, and made some novel discoveries, which allowed me, then opportunity came up in industry, or back in academia at UC Davis, was recruiting, and again, I got a phone call, and so I pursued it and ended up going back.
And I think the move going to industry is becoming increasingly common. I don't know if the move back is as common.
Yeah, typically not. I think, when back in the 90s, it was sort of the, if you left academia for industry, you were sort of selling your soul, and it was kind of frowned upon. But there were a lot of, especially in biotech, they were doing discovery research, they were publishing in high impact journals. And so you could, it was in some ways it was like being at a research institute. Coming back is more difficult. I think for me, it was harder than I thought, but I think what made it a little bit easier is that I had already been in academia. I'd gone through the tenure process. I knew what was expected. And I was also going back into the University of California system, which I had already had experience in. But coming back, I think, the demands of academia, where, you're expected to teach and do research and service, the demands are higher, and it takes a lot of juggling and time management. That it's not that you don't have that there are not a lot of demands in industry, but you don't have so many competing, you don't have the competing demands of teaching and research and having to split your time in that regards.
Did you find, and this is interesting, I didn't expect to go in this direction, but so as a woman scientist, did you find the experience in academia different than the experience in industry? Was one more accommodating and was able to harness your talent more, or were they pretty similar?
I would say that they were similar, and I think some of the experiences I think some of the challenges and barriers are similar in academia and industry for a woman.
So I know this might be too personal, but and so feel free to not answer. But have you personally experienced harassment and gender discrimination? I would imagine, unfortunately, it's probably fairly universal for established women scientists, right?
Yes, and I would say, the answer is yes. And I think, there are many reports in the National Academy of Sciences report that came out in 2018 showed that, the majority of women have in science, have in the STEM, field, have experienced, sexual harassment and gender discrimination at various levels.
And that study said that between 20 and 50% of female students experience sexual harassment directed at them by faculty or staff. So I think in addition, women can also face a host of degrading or threatening treatment from male colleagues and even worse, people in positions of authority. Do you think we're making progress at all, given that 2018 is 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Do you think we are making progress as you've seen throughout your career?
Yes and no. I still, I think what I really liked about that National Academy of Sciences report was the iceberg. The discussion of it, or the illustration of it as an iceberg, and many, most people have institutions have just concentrated on everything above the water, and that's just a very small, piece of it.
Which is the most blatant,
right? Sexual, harassment or coercion and assault and physical, assault. But and to some extent, I think there's the 2018 report drew attention to that part of the, the above the water, and institutions have instituted policies, but I still think there's a lot of harassment still going on. The reports that I've read recently say little has changed. I think women are still sometimes reluctant to say anything because it is it's a small community, and fear of retaliation or that nothing will be done or they won't be taken seriously. There have been, I think, I think NIH start paying and NSF start paying more attention to it, and men who have been accused of sexual harassment and shown, where it's been proven, have lost grants and lost membership in National Academy of Science and other things. And so I think that's a positive outcome. But I still think the majority, what's under the surface, still hasn't been addressed and is still a major problem.
And you're not going to lose your job because you're rude or because of microaggressions or because of all, so you could be someone who still treated the women who were subordinate to you in a laboratory horribly, but not necessarily have any sort of consequences for that.
It's this constant, persistent environment that women find themselves in that, ultimately, many of them leave. They decide that the department, and it's often at the department level, and they decide they've had enough and they decide to leave science. And I think, one of the things that I was reading a couple of reports, and people have talked about women leaving at early stages, but it's actually happening throughout their career. Women are leaving at all stages, not just pipelines, not just leaky at the assistant level where women aren't making tenure or having families. It's occurring at all levels of their career, at full professors, associates, and so. I think it's still a persistent problem that everybody talks about changing the climate, and it's hard to, it's hard to describe it. It's hard to, come up with metrics to measure it if the climate's gotten better or not. But I think it's something that needs more discussion and is still a persistent problem.
Well, it feels like it's structural, and I think there's a perception that that academia and science generally are progressive institutions concerned with, with facts and with, achievement and, the best idea. And yet clearly there are huge issues still regarding both sexual harassment and gender discrimination. And so I was going to ask you, why do you think it's so prevalent in both academia and science?
I think, historically, it's been a male-dominated field. It's very hierarchical. So, in some areas, some fields are more, medicine is very hierarchical, but science in general, you have a lab head, and your trainees are subordinate, and so there's this power structure, and so I think that's part of it, and I think women and men view things differently or perceive things differently, and I think part of it is this power structure, and I think there needs to be, what hasn't happened is there's not enough women in leadership positions to change this power structure, and so the climate hasn't changed, and it just persists, and nobody calls attention to it or does anything to change it. And so this idea, I've often heard, people say, well, when the older faculty retire, it'll get better. but that doesn't happen because it gets, you know, passed down generation to generation, because the younger, you know, people see what's tolerated, and so that just becomes the norm, and nobody says anything.
Do you think institutions that where there are greater representation of women in leadership, do you think they're doing better on the issue? Or do you think it's just so baked into the system?
Yeah. No, I think I think some areas of science where women are a majority, like psychology in some areas, are doing better than those that still have this, you know, imbalance. And, you know, so, you know, some of the big questions are why it's been 3 decades. And if you look at the numbers, they haven't changed that much as far as women at these higher ranks of, you know, department chairs, deans, presidents. And so what is holding women back? Because now, at first it was, okay, it's a numbers game. There are just not that many women in the pipeline. Well, now there are plenty women in the pipeline. And, you know, and now there's, you know, over at least 50% or more of graduate students in the biological sciences are women. So, you know, what is hindering women from getting hired in tenure track positions, making tenure, or then getting appointed as department chairs or deans or chancellors? And I think, you know, one of the things you see is people say, oh, well, look, we've hired a female chancellor. Okay, that's one woman. She can't, you know, and that's at the head of the institution. What I think needs to happen is there's still a very small percentage of department chairs that are women. And I think it's at the level of the department where we really need to, I think that we need to change the climate. And if it changes there, it'll permeate up. But that's where it's tolerated. And if it can change there, maybe we can change the climate to the better. But there needs to be a critical mass of women in the department also, and a critical mass of senior women. You know, if you have 1 or 2 women and they're both assistant professors, they're not going to speak up and they're going to feel intimidated.
There's still, I think, a lot of, because it's not structural, it's not sort of built into systems. I think a lot of those hires can be for show, can be for PR. And so you don't, you never get real, persistent change.
Yeah.
Because it's, it's basically, it'll look good if we hire a woman in this position. Now that woman may be enormously qualified, but if it's the result of men thinking that it's somehow building goodwill, I think that's really problematic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I would imagine, like, well, I thought racism until the last few years. Racism, I think, had gone sort of underground. And, you weren't seeing until these last few years, I think, blatant racism. But racism persisted in more subtle, but no less sort of detrimental forms. And I think I'm imagining that's happening with gender discrimination as well. It's not as obvious, which makes it harder in some ways
it's
to deal with.
that persistent sexism, and it's everything underneath that, in that iceberg, that is hard to quantify and is just sort of persistent. And it's also those things that people just say, oh, just that's the way it is, just deal with it, and it creates an environment where you don't feel respected, you feel powerless, you don't feel like, women constantly complain about not being heard, not, being heard in faculty meetings. So you say something and it's totally ignored, and then a man says the exact same thing and it's a brilliant idea, So not getting credit for your ideas, not being heard, or feeling like if you do say something or you bring up a problem, you're automatically tagged as, negative or difficult or, divisive, all these things, it's always negative. And so, women have, been told to be more assertive, yet when they get labeled as aggressive. So you can't win.
And so what is the experience of a woman postdoc right now? I mean, how, and maybe to early career, what are the barriers that they're still facing, and what do you see as perhaps some of the advantages that they have now versus 10 years ago or 20 years ago?
I think, so for any postdoc, it's one, getting into the top labs. So, and on, in many cases, those are run by men. So if there is a bias there, if, against, for male versus a female postdoc, there's one potential barrier. And then, the numbers or the data show that women, and, so what's important in a postdoc is that you get your name on, as first author.
Yeah.
And there is a discrepancy between, the women, between the number of publications with men versus female women as first authors. So there's another potential barrier. There's discrepancies in, the types of journals that women, get published in versus men. So, all of these things can add up. And so in order to get that faculty position, you need to have, strong publications, first author publications in the top tier journals. And nowadays you also need to have, to have a grant, be it a K award or something like that. So all of those are, if there's any kind of bias in the way grants are reviewed or papers are reviewed, those things add up and make it more difficult then to get that tenure track position. And then there's just there appears to be implicit bias. I mean, two applications can come in that are identical, and the female one will be ranked lower than the male one. They've done the studies where they've changed the names. And so there's all those potential places where it will be more difficult for a female to get a postdoc to transition into a tenure track position.
So, so do you see women just, and because of those factors, are they leaving academia? Are they leaving science altogether? Are they?
Well, I think there's several places in the pipeline where women will leave, but yeah, early on, they may get their PhD, but choose, if they see as graduate students or postdocs a hostile environment, for women faculty in that department, even let's say if they're in a man's, if the head of their lab is male, they may decide, well, I'm not going to go for a tenure track position. I'm going to go another track. I'm going to either go take a teaching position, or maybe I'll go industry, or I'll do something else. So there's one decision point, whether, do I pursue a tenure track position, and depending on their experiences, they may be more or less aware of some of the challenges, and they make a decision. Yes, I want to, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to pursue it, or no, I just don't want to be in that environment. And I have had female graduate students say to me, I don't want your job. I see what you have to go through, and I don't want to have to deal with that. Then, then you become an assistant professor. And then the next thing is, okay, now, you need to make tenure. and, how easy is for you to make tenure. You need to be published, you need to get grants, and, what the number of publications, the number of citations, and all the data suggests too that women's papers get fewer citations, women, have a harder time publishing in certain journals. All these things, work against you. And then, how then you have to get tenure, and then you get tenure, and all of the, then you move up. And if you have aspirations for leadership positions, you need to, to move up the ranks, you need to be, you need to show, national and international reputation. So that means getting invited to speak either, at university as an invited seminar speaker or at national conferences. It means, getting awards, being put up, nominated for awards, all those things. And there's obvious bias, the data suggests significant bias in all of those things.
That's well, and I think that speaks to some of the things that we at APS could.
And that's where I think.
And maybe even modeling more broadly. I guess I first want to talk about seeing a lot of that is within academia. It's within labs. It's within the academy itself. It's sort of within science. It sounds like what can we be doing better? What should universities be doing? What should individuals' labs be doing?
Well, I think as a first step is just acknowledging, that there is a problem, and then trying to figure out how, what steps can be made. So obviously, steps can be made at the level of the institutions when it comes to hiring committees, making sure there's representation of, women are represented on the committees. I think so. And then
is that happening?
Not uniformly. I think some institutions do it better than others. I know when I was at the University of California, Davis, they instituted, policies that and procedures, and you had to, they had training courses and everything. And so they were looking at the compositions of these committees, very, they were looking to make sure that they were represented by men and women. They were also, making sure that when advertisements went out and then they looked at the candidate list, that there were male and female applicants, because that's the other place. If you put out an announcement, how is that announcement, how is it written? Is it biasing towards, one or the other, or is there some bias in it? Are you advertising it appropriately to get, the best applicant pool? And are you getting an applicant pool that's, representative? Are there males and females in it? And when you're then, when you're interviewing, looking for bias. So I think some institutions are doing a better job than others. And I think it's something that, it needs to be paid attention to. I think recently in reading some of the, the literature, I didn't realize, I guess, the extent of bias in publications, that women were underrepresented as editors, as reviewers, as editorial boards. And this is something, obviously the APS can have an impact on. And I think we are, we now have, I think half of the editorships of the journals are females, but that's only, that's this, in the very recent past. And so I think, the next step is making sure the editorial boards are, have representation from women. Some journals are looking to make sure that reviewers, there are male and female reviewers on papers. But the other thing, what I didn't realize, I was sort of naive about this, is the level at which there's discrepancies in citations of papers that have, female authors versus male authors. And I think, one thing at the individual lab level, making sure that when you put together, I don't think anybody pays attention when they put their reference list together for a paper, they don't look to see what percentage of the papers are from male authors versus female authors. I mean, I haven't ever looked at that, but I think it's something to start paying attention to. Do you, there tends to be there's a tendency to reference certain papers in the field, and I bet more often than not, those tend to be the top males in the field, not the females. So I think that's some place where at the level of the individual lab and, and training students and postdocs that you can start putting into practice, or making people more aware of what papers are they really citing and why are they citing those. And, social media has its benefits and its negatives and positives. And one of the, Twitter now is being used to publicize papers or to advertise. And I think the data is showing that the more a paper is tweeted, the more citations it's getting, or the more noticed. And there tends to be more men, men are more prominent on Twitter than women. And so either women have to get on social media, or we have to be very careful that we're not biasing again, towards just those papers that happen to get, mentioned. And I think this is where at the journal levels, we can pay more attention to, or make sure that we're not biasing that.
So it's on the journal level. Yeah, I told you I was speaking at a conference on a panel, and one of my fellow panelists was talking about really going to fairly extreme lengths to make review blind, to really strip the names of folks out for all sorts of things, so that it truly became gender blind in how awards were done, and how and what papers got published. And do you think that's a solution?
I don't know. I think I've participated in some of these, trying to do blinded reviews of grants, and it's really hard because you have to get rid of everything, all the references, in order to make it totally blind.
Right.
Not just the names up front and the institution, but everything in the reference list. And then it's hard to review them sometimes, to know what, does this person really have the expertise, or do, what have they done? Papers I don't know. I don't know if it's possible to do it totally blind. But
I think, and you talk about awareness being sort of the first step, but I would imagine it has to be more than sort of peripheral awareness. It has to be pretty specific and it's to the institution, to the department. And how do you do that? I mean, how do you begin to create to wake people up? I mean, to help. In a sense, I think the National Academy's study did that. I think the movie
Picture a Scientist.
Picture Scientist.
Yeah.
I think anyone who saw that, it certainly was incredibly striking.
And that's, when I first saw that movie, the first thing I thought was everybody, not every male and female scientist needs to see this. And what my fear is often is that it's just women that are looking at this, and
right.
We're talking to, you're talking to the converted, it happens too, they have all these initiatives and you form these committees, and it's usually women talking to women. And I think we need to engage more men in the discussion. And I think they need to hear what women have experienced, but also, and participate in the solutions. I think it has to be a joint effort. And I think, oftentimes there'll be workshops on gender bias and the entire panel is women and the audience is all women. And I think we need to get men and women.
If the wrong people are in that room.
Right. And so I think, we have to do better. We have to engage everyone in this discussion and how do we make it better? I mean, there is a problem. And we're not pointing fingers at, it's your fault, because I think sometimes people start to feel like, well, I haven't done this. But
which doesn't
you're in
matter.
this environment and you see it happening and nobody's doing anything about it. And
yeah, whether
oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's the same, it's the same with race. The fact that you don't particularly see that you personally have blatantly discriminated against someone or exhibited bias doesn't matter. And it is, and I think we've all participated in a system that's allowed women, highly qualified women, to be disadvantaged in a variety of situations just because that's the way it's always been, or it's built into the to the way we do things.
Well, and as and people, as you mentioned, seeing that, okay, so let's say it's pointed out that a department doesn't have any women, or there's only one woman, so they hire some women, and all of a sudden it's, look, see, we hired women. Well, that's just step one. You hired these women, as assistant professors. Now you need to put them in an environment where they're going to succeed and get tenure. It's no good if they don't get tenure. And you see it all the time. The women come in and the environment hasn't changed, and they're up against the same, the same issues of having to prove themselves more, and feeling that they're not respected, and then they fail, and that.
But those men who did it for the wrong reason say, look, we tried to hire, and it didn't work. It's you bring women, these young women, into a hostile environment, and then when they don't succeed, you say, oh, well, we tried, we brought, we gave them the opportunity.
Or promoting a woman into a leadership position when she's not, just because you've been told you need to have a female, and if they're not, if you promote them when they're not ready and then they fail, that's worse, because then people just say, see, we tried. But there's plenty of times, and I think women experience this a lot as far as the leadership is women are often not given the same credit for what they've done, and so a man and a woman will apply for a position, and the woman will constantly have to, somebody will always tell her, well, you need more, you need to do this or this, and the man will often get promoted with less experience and be given the chance to prove himself, and so that happens time and time again. But the other thing I think we can do too, and I think it's something that the APS can even, participate or be a part of, is that we talk a lot about mentoring, and mentoring is important, but I think I've come to realize it's not just about mentoring, it's about having an advocate or a sponsor, somebody that doesn't just give you advice, but somebody that will nominate you for awards, somebody that will, put their neck out for you, and or that helps you, get these positions or these awards or get on committees that, you know, are seen to be important committees that are going to advance your career. And I think men more often than not have a sponsor. Women often don't have a sponsor or an advocate that goes out of their way to make sure that they're, you know.
Do you think it's, you know, it's still in a sense trying to fit into a patriarchal system, you know? You know, it's saying, how can we help women do better in this system that is, you know, designed to be, you know, again, to be gamed against them. And
Yep.
how do we change the system? I mean, are there things we can do? You know, I think we've said this about a number of things. The entire sort of advancement structure in academia right now is really set up for a different time in many ways. I mean, it's been the same forever, and
Right.
and it really relies on you. All of these points that women are disadvantaged at. I mean, to succeed in that system, you have to try so much harder if you're a woman. I mean, you have to be to do more and be smarter and be luckier, and to just sort of navigate a system that is not built for you or by you. So I mean, I keep thinking, how do we do something more structural? How do we actually shine a spotlight on the deficiencies of the system itself?
It's a good question. And I agree. I think that the way we've addressed it in the past, you know, 3 decades is trying to teach women how to survive in the current, you know, in the man's world, instead of trying to change the culture so it fits more with, you know, with women's ideals or the way they, you know, look at things. So that hasn't worked, trying to make us more like men. I don't know. I guess what are your, I don't know how to change it in that regard. Besides,
It's I had a conversation with a prominent member who we're talking particularly about African Americans and getting funding, and he said, you know, often their research is focused on things that just are not attractive for the funders, and they have. So I really try to coach them to rethink what their research is about. And I said, maybe the problem isn't what their research focus is. Maybe the problem is we have a bunch of white people who are evaluating whether this is the right thing to study or not.
right.
And I think that's certainly been true for women, that I mean, women studying women's diseases received less funding forever. I mean,
Right.
and it was because of who was making the decisions.
Yeah. And a lot of these, you know, grant review panels are afraid to look at some, I mean, it's very, it's interesting, you know, the idea is that you want to fund innovative work, but if you propose something innovative, it is reviewed negatively because it doesn't fit into the current dogma. I mean, it's like you need to play safe, and if you try to go outside the mainstream, then you know, you're swimming upstream, and it's a difficult challenge.
So what do you think, Abe? What do you think we can do? What do you think the society can do to really make a serious difference?
Well, I think, you know, there are obviously publications is a big part that I think the society can play a major role into shining a light on some of these biases and trying to, you know, be proactive and make sure that they're not biased. You know, I think the society has done an excellent, you know, they identified the problem as far as that there was a lack of women in leadership positions. And now, you know, we now have had many women presidents and more female counselors. But I think where we lack is where we still could do better is in, you know, women as get the major awards are still, I think, biased towards men. So making sure that women are nominated, that the nominations are for these awards are as diverse as possible. I think, I think the career, what's it called? It's Career Center.
Oh, the Career Gateway.
Yeah. So I think, there has been a lot of attention placed on early stage investigators and the assistant professors, but I think the mid-career women and the mid-career people have been ignored, and I think that's an important place where that women are dropping out, but also that's a critical stage where you're going to potentially be promoted into these leadership positions. And so helping women as much as possible, and as making it as members of the APS, can we become advocate for these women be the, all members, men and women, to make sure that we're advocating for our colleagues to get these awards, or get on certain committees or whatever, and actively serve as as sponsors, not just mentors but sponsors. I think as much as possible, even at the institutional level, I mean, just shining a light that in making sure that it continues to be seen that this is a problem. It hasn't gone away, and we need to do something. And I really think a place to start is at the departmental levels. We need more department chairs that are women. We need to change that environment and that culture, and hopefully and get parity as far as more women, senior women, so that there is a critical mass of women that are in these departments.
I wonder if what we need to do, I keep thinking of so many of the real issues that you talked about that a woman faces in her career as a scientist really happen within their work. I mean, it happens within their workplace mostly. So I'm trying to figure out how, I think there's work for us to do to continue to improve our own systems and structures at APS. Particularly around awards and publications. But I also wonder, is there a way for us to have to play a role in shining a spotlight on these issues for our members' institutions at their workplaces? And I think, we have no idea, for instance, what percentage of the institutions represented in the APS membership have women department chairs.
Right.
That would be something that we could study, or how many women tenured professors in R1 institutions. I think that would be fairly easy for us to do research along those lines, and then make a story of it. Really begin to promote it.
Well, and sometimes, if you gather that information and publish it, and then members read it, and oftentimes you sort of don't realize how bad it is until you start looking at numbers and saying, wow, I thought it was, I bet you a lot of people think it's much better than it is. They probably don't realize that still, less than 30% of tenure track positions are given to women. And that, if you actually, when you start seeing the numbers and you realize, wow, there's only 25% of the full professors are women, what happened?
We don't know if in physiology, if we are better or worse than that average. We could be on either side. And we know that sort of tracks with the percentage of our membership. So I do think that's, it's interesting. We could really be studying pay disparities as well. So I think there is a way for us to really shine the spotlight
and I think, you know, like I said, shiny, and even I would say most trainees probably don't realize, you know, with respect to citations and things, what they're doing or how biased it really is. And if you shine a light on it and make people pay attention to it a little bit more, I mean, I think, you know, that slowly, hopefully, will, you know, change the culture and or at least make people more aware. I think many people just don't realize that the problem exists at the level that it has. And when you see these numbers from 30 years ago and today and realize how little they've changed, I think that's the other thing, putting it in perspective. Everybody says, oh, it's, you know, things have gotten better. Well, the numbers don't, you know, don't show that. So, I mean, there's definitely places for improvement.
So anything else that you want to talk about, or ideas of how we might move this gender equity forward?
I mean, I think we've touched on I mean, a lot of different topics and subjects, but I think, you know, I think there's a number of places where the APS can have an impact, and I think we've some places, you know, some of it we can't, but as you said, we can shine a light on it and hopefully, you know, make people start thinking about it more at the institutional level. So
Great. Dr. Sue Bodine, thank you very much.
thank you.